All right, everybody. Hey, it's Mr. Eisnes, and we're going to be going over the seventh grade STAR material that you should know as an eighth grader before you take your test. So let's get right into it. We're basically going to be covering all of seventh grade once again. So everyone's favorite grade, of course. Let's get into it. All right. So we do start off with cells, all right, and specifically cell theory. So there's three things that you need to remember with cell theory, all right. Cells are the basic unit of life, okay? I like to think of them as Legos. They're the building block that are going to make everything that's alive, okay? Cells come from pre-existing cells, okay? So you need to have cells in order to make new cells. There's no other way to do it. You can't just make Frankenstein out of nothing, things you find around the house. All right, you got to have cells to make new cells. Okay, and then number three, living organisms are made up of one or more cells. So it's a reiteration of number one, where they're the basic unit of life, and now we're saying you can be unicellular or you can have multiple cells. Okay, you can't have zero. You got to have one or more. Okay, and so usually these questions come with, and we'll see here, they'll start talking about the scientists. So that means they're talking about Schleiden and Schwann. Okay, Schleiden found out that plants are made up of cells, and then Schwann, a year later, found out that animals are made up of cells. And then Virchow took both of their observations and said, you know what? Everything that's living is made out of cells. Okay, so using that information, and your knowledge of cell theory, you should be able to read the question and figure out that all cells have cell wall. That can't be right? Because only plants have cell walls. Okay, all cells arise from pre-existing cells. Well, that's it, right? You that's one of the rules. That's number two, I believe. Okay, all cells are capable of photosynthesis. No, again, only plants are. Okay, and then all cells can develop any other type of cell. That's not how it works. Okay, we have specific tissues in our body that do specific things. So the answer is G. All right, let's move on to cell organelles. Okay, so remembering what all these things do, just a refresher for you. Okay, the cell membrane is that outer layer that lets things go in and then out. Okay, the cytoplasm is a jelly-like substance that suspends everything in the cell and kind of keeps it where it is, gives some structure. Okay, the nucleus is the brain or the mastermind behind everything that happens in the cell. It tells what proteins to make, when to do it, and basically makes sure the cell is in working order. Okay, vacuoles are used for storage. Okay, vacuoles are in plants and animals. We're going to talk about a specific vacuole in plants here in a second. The mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, of course. All right, the powerhouse of the cell. It's going to make all your energy. It's going to do cellular respiration. Hopefully you remember that equation and how it works. But cellular respiration is how we take glucose and then convert it into energy that we can use, called ATP. Okay, the three green ones are important, because this is how you determine if a cell is a plant cell or an animal cell. Okay, the green ones are only in plants. So if you see a cell wall, you see chloroplast, or you see a large water vacuole, it's got to be a plant. Okay, so cell wall, rigid, provides structure. This is the stem of a plant's really rigid until you crack it. Okay, you can hear it snap. That's because the cell wall, the cellulose, is structured to keep the plant solid. Okay, then we have chloroplasts. Chloroplasts are what make the plant green to begin with. Okay, this allows photosynthesis to occur. This is where it happens. Photosynthesis makes the glucose, cellular respiration breaks the glucose down into energy we can use. Okay, so chloroplasts are super important to plant cells because that's how we get all of our energy for the ecosystem. Okay, large water vacuoles where plants store water. If there's not enough water, the plant is going to wither. It's going to wilt. Okay, if there's too much water, the plant's going to wilt. Think of a balloon that doesn't have enough air in it. Okay, it's not filled out. Think of a balloon with too much air. It's about to burst. It's starting to shift its shape a little bit. Okay, we want to have balance. Okay, and so in order to do that, it needs to have the perfect amount of turgor pressure. That's the pressure of the water on the cell wall to hold the plant upright. Okay, so let's keep looking at the different types of cells. So animal cell versus plant cell. Basically, everything that we talked about, plants and animals have both, except for plants are going to have the cell wall, the chloroplast, and large water vacuole. Now, they share vacuoles. Okay, they share vacuoles. Ones that we didn't talk about, endoplasmic reticulum. Okay, the rough and the smooth ER is what that's called. The rough has ribosomes. Ribosomes are protein factories. Okay, the Golgi apparatus is like the UPS of the cell, and lysosomes are like the garbage men. They're going to destroy any waste that you have. Okay, so make sure that you kind of review these and are ready for this test. All right, so looking at just looking at cells, you can see there's a difference. The main issue with, or the main thing with plant cells is usually they're going to be green, okay, and usually they're going to be very rigid, very boxy, okay, whereas animal cells are going to be rounded. All right, animal cells are rounded to fit into different types of tissue, whereas plant cells have that cell wall that's rigid. It doesn't move very well, so it doesn't shift. And it stays in one spot. It's kind of locked. Okay, let's talk about reproduction very, very quickly. Okay, so we have sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction involves two parents. They both give some of their offspring. They both give half of the DNA that the offspring needs. Okay, and so their offspring is going to look like both of them. All right, this means that their offspring is going to be different than them. Okay, if you think about your parents, you might look a lot like your parents, but you're not an exact copy of them. All right, same with your siblings, unless you have an identical twin. All right, you're going to look similar because you get the same DNA from your parents, but not the same because you get different parts of that DNA. So different and diverse, they mean similar, they mean the same thing. Okay, diverse just means it's going to be different. All right, asexual, that means there's going to be one parent. Because there's one parent, you only have one option for the DNA that you can give. Okay, one option for DNA. So that means you got to make exact copies of yourself. Okay, you start with one, and then boom, you're going to make an exact copy. All right. So one parent creates uniform offspring. So uniform means the same. All right, you can think of different uniforms in the military. Everybody looks the same. Uniforms in sports, everyone looks the same. That's the idea there. There's no diversity in what they look like because they have the same DNA because they only have one option. Okay, so in this question, certain species of whiptail lizards only have female individuals and no males. These lizards reproduce asexually. What is one disadvantage of asexual reproduction in these lizards? Okay, a disadvantage of asexual reproduction is going to be that B, all members of the population are genetically very similar and less able to survive environmental change. So if something changes, the lizards are all the same, they're not going to have the diversity to be able to overcome any of those changes that they're not accustomed to. Okay, now a benefit would be a population can be established by a single individual in a relatively short period of time. You don't need to look for mates, and therefore you can reproduce very, very rapidly. Okay, so it's B. Let's keep looking at reproduction. There's just some good vocab words to talk about here. So inherited traits, things that you get from your parents. That's what inherited means, are governed in the genetic material. Genetic material involves DNA. DNA, is, when coiled up, makes a chromosome, and it's found in the nucleus of the cell. Okay, and so material found in genes within chromosomes of the nucleus. Okay, so here's a cell. It's pretty rounded, so it looks like an animal cell to begin with. Which organelle stores the information that determines an individual's blood type? Well, blood type is going to be a characteristic or trait, and all of our traits are determined by our DNA. So where is our DNA located? Well, it's located in the nucleus, so it's got to be number 1. Okay, organelle number 1, or F is our answer. Okay, 2 is pointing to the Golgi apparatus. 3 is pointing to the mitochondria, and 4 is pointing to a vacuole. Okay, but the DNA inside the nucleus is what's going to give us our traits. So it could have been blood type, it could have been skin tone, it could have been if you have curly hair or straight hair. Okay, okay, moving on to circulatory system. This is all about transporting. Okay, blood is like little rivers in our body that transport things. Okay, almost everything gets transported by the blood. All right, so if you see any question about how things are delivered to cells, it's got to be the circulatory system. Okay, the heart is the pump that makes this whole thing run. Obviously, we need our heart because if it stops working, we can't transport things to the cells. The cells can't get what they need to survive. You die. Okay, when people run long distances, their muscles require increased amounts of oxygen. Which system is responsible for carrying oxygen to the muscles? Now, trick question, just a little bit, Because when you think of oxygen, you think, I breathe it in to my lungs. That's a different system. That's respiratory system. Okay, so don't fall for the trick, because it's talking about not obtaining the oxygen, but delivering it, right? Okay. What system is responsible for carrying the oxygen to the muscles? So what carries oxygen? Your blood does. Okay. The more oxygen it carries, the more bright red it looks. So it's got to be D, the circulatory system, because it's all about transportation or carrying stuff. All right. Respiratory system. Like we said, this is about gas exchange. This is taking in oxygen into your lungs, switching it out inside your blood. The blood that has a bunch of carbon dioxide switches it out. So now the blood has the oxygen, and now the carbon dioxide can leave your body. Okay, so you're going to excrete the carbon dioxide, whereas you're taking in that oxygen. All right, we're going to keep doing this over and over and over again, because we got to undergo cellular respiration in our bodies to have energy. All right. Skeletal system, it's going to protect and support you. Okay. Your bones are really, really hard, and so it takes a lot of force in order to break them. All right. They're going to protect you in that way. They're also going to provide support. Okay. If you didn't have any bones, your muscles don't have anything to pull on, so you can't move. You just literally just be in a pile of muscle, and you couldn't do anything. All right. So having the bones is super important, because muscles attach to those bones. And then when you flex your muscle, okay, one is going to compress and pull your arm toward you, or pull whatever part of your body you're trying to move. Muscles are about movement. It goes together. Okay. Digestive system. This is about breaking down food or energy so that we can absorb it and use it. All right. And so we have this entire process. We go from the mouth, the esophagus, to the stomach, okay, to the small intestine, to the large intestine, and then out of the rectum and anus. Okay. But another large part of this is breaking down a food in two ways. Now, you've learned a lot more about this since 7th grade, but physical and chemical means. So physical, all right, I believe this is the next slide. Okay. Yep. Here we go. Physical means a new substance is not produced. Okay. It's like cutting cake. Just because I cut a cake into a million pieces doesn't mean it's changed at all. It's still a cake. It's just smaller, right? It's in different pieces. Whereas chemical changes is trying to make the cake and bake the cake from the beginning, okay? Because we're changing from the eggs and the sugar and the flour and whatever you need for a cake. I'm not a cook, okay? But whatever you need for the cake needs to be put together, heated up, and it's going to change into a new substance, okay? It's going to go from the cake batter to the actual cake, okay? And so it's going to change. So that's where we think of chemical changes, because something new is produced and it's not reversible. You can't get those eggs and the sugar and the flour back. Okay. Whereas physical changes, you can take water, you can freeze it. It looks different. It has different properties, but you can always melt that ice back into water. It's reversible. Okay. Not always is it reversible, or can you put things back that you cut up? Okay. But basically, and by basically, I mean, it's literally the same thing. It's just a smaller piece of it, okay, when you cut things. All right, physical chemical change. Okay, burning firewood. Okay, that's going to release CO2. This is a chemical reaction, because you're changing the fire or the wood into carbon dioxide and heat and burning up that wood. Okay, chewing your food with your teeth. Okay, so that's a physical change, because it's just like cutting or mashing something up. Okay, saliva, breaking down carbohydrates into simple sugars. You're going from a complex carbohydrate or something that is a large chain to something that's a small chain. So it's actually going to be chemical change. Okay, frying eggs in a pan, because there's heat there, it's irreversible, right? You can't get your scrambled eggs and you can't turn them back into the liquid yolk form. All right, so you've chemically changed and altered all the proteins in that egg. All right, cutting logs into firewood. Okay, you're just getting smaller pieces of the firewood. That's it. So it's got to be physical. Okay, using a whisk to scramble eggs. You're just mixing around the eggs. You haven't changed any of the chemicals. You've just mixed that yolk with the egg white. Okay, the iron in a nail is rusting. You're actually getting a chemical change from the iron changing into something else. It's getting oxidized by the oxygen around it. Okay, a hammer bending a nail into a new shape. Still a nail, just a different shape. That's all. Okay, so take a peek, pause the video if you need to, and review. Let's keep going. So we're going to talk about this question involving the mouth. All right, so we got teeth is going to crush food into smaller pieces, whereas saliva is mixed with food to make food particles softer and easier to swallow. Okay, do we know that saliva is going to be a chemical change? Yes, but did it mention it in the answer here? It did not. Okay, it only talked about a physical change for saliva. Okay, making just Putting it in water doesn't necessarily change it into a new substance. All right. Hydrochloric acid is an enzyme that breaks down food molecules into smaller molecules. That is a chemical change. All right. And so that's where we're getting at here. And that's why the answer is C, because we're breaking down food by enzymes and acid in the stomach. Okay. The excretory system. All right. This is how we're going to get rid of all the wastes. Okay. Sweating would count. Okay. Breathing out CO2 would count. Okay. Kidneys are going to filter the blood for different things that we do not want in there, and we're going to get rid of it. All right, it goes to a tube called the ureters, and then into the bladder where it's stored until you're ready to go to the bathroom and get rid of it throughout your urethra. Okay, the main function of this system. Okay, so you just got to identify that kidney, ureters, and bladder all go with the excretory system. All right, so we want to remove waste here. All right, so integumentary system is all about skin, okay, and what that does for us, skin, hair, and nails. It's going to actually provide a lot of protection for our body. Nervous system is really, really cool, but it allows for communication within the body. The brain is going to identify things and then decide what to do about it. All right, so you need to communicate with your muscles in order to do things, okay? The endocrine system is going to do everything that the nervous system cannot do, and this is going to be glands that secrete hormones that tell your cells what to do. All right, and so what happens is your brain will actually tell your hormones to secrete these things, but once these glands, to secrete the hormones. But once the hormones are out, they're traveling through the blood and not an electrical system like the nervous system. Okay, so it's much slower, but you can tell a lot of different parts of the body what to do and what to produce because of this. So it's a chemical messaging system using glands. Okay, all right, moving into energy flow. Okay, food chains and food webs and energy pyramids. Okay, so we always start with the producers. The producers are the plants. They're going to produce all the energy in the system. Primary consumers are the first option for consuming those plants. They eat the thing that's below them. Okay, secondary consumers, second option. They eat the thing that's below them. They can eat primary consumers and producers. Typically, they only stick with primary consumers, but they could do both. They would be called an omnivore then because they eat both. Carnivore means you just eat animals. Herbivore just means you just eat plants. Okay, tertiary consumer, typically going to be our apex predator. They're not going to have a lot of predators because nothing's above them to eat them. They're going to eat whatever's below them. Okay, typically they're only carnivores though. They only eat meat. Okay, food chains and energy pyramids. The arrows show the flow of energy from one organism to another. The arrow will point to the consumer. Okay, so the consumer is the one that's eating. Okay, so blackberries pointing to caterpillars. Blackberries don't eat caterpillars. Caterpillars eat blackberries. They're pointing to the consumer. The caterpillar is the consumer of the blackberries. Okay, the caterpillar points to the gardener snake. The gardener snake eats the caterpillar. The gardener snake gets eaten by the raccoon. Okay, the great horned owl is a consumer of all kinds of things. Okay, it eats everything that points to it. So keep that in mind. Make sure you don't mix that up. All right. So based on the model, which consumer would receive the greatest amount of energy captured by the producers in the food chain? Okay, well, the producer is where? It's the bottom. Okay, the producers are our plants. So the closer you are, all right, the more energy you receive. So in our pyramid, okay, the primary consumers are going to get most of the energy that the plants produce. Okay, compared to the secondary consumer, which is the chudish, or the tertiary consumer, which is the wedge-tailed eagle. Okay, so the ring-tailed opossum and the wallies are going to be your best options here. And so this involves the 10% rule. 100% of the energy is made up by okay, let's see if I can type or right here. 100% of the energy is made up of, made by the plants, and only 10% gets passed on to the primary. 10% of 10% is 1%. It's passed on to the secondary, and 10% of 1% is 0.1%. Okay, is passed on to our tertiary consumer. Okay, that means that 90% is lost, and it's lost due to heat. Okay, 90% of 10% is 9%, and that's lost due to heat. Now, to explain this, Okay. The reason you lose heat is because each of these animals need to live. They need to do stuff. Okay. So the plants need to grow and develop. Okay. The ring-tailed opossum needs to walk around and find more things to eat. Okay. Same with the wedge-tailed eagle and the chutish. Okay. They all got to do stuff. And so they use most of the energy they attain. But once they die, once they get eaten, they can only pass on about 10% of that energy. Okay, so that's why we call it the 10% rule. And that's why 10% is going to be higher than 1% or 0.1%. All right, so let's see. Clear screen, please. And we're going to go back to the mouse. All right, H is our answer, the ring-tailed opossum. Okay, a partial mountain forest food web is shown here. Okay, we got mountain lions, we got elk, we got trees, we got shrubs, we got rabbits, we got snakes, we got grasses, we got mice, we got crickets, we got frogs, we got all this stuff, right? Which statement does not describe the relationship shown in the food web? Okay, elk are prey of mountain lions. Well, elk are pointing to mountain lions. Good, that works. Mice are herbivores that consume grasses and are preyed on by snakes. Mice consumed by grasses. Okay, consumed by grasses, or they consume grass. Okay, and they're preyed on by snakes. Snakes eat them. Okay. Owls prey on rabbits and frogs. Owls kill rabbits. Yep, the arrow's pointing to them. And frogs. Good. So it's got to be J. Rabbits consume shrubs and are parasites of grasses. Well, rabbits consume shrubs, yes, but they're parasites of grasses? No, they're predators of grass. Okay, they're going to eat grass. It's not going to be a parasite because a parasite would assume that that the rabbit is benefiting from the grass, but the grass is negatively affected. All right, and that's different than predator-prey relationship. So make sure you know that. All right, so we're going to talk about watersheds really quickly. Human activities can affect groundwater. Okay, so basically, water is everywhere and it's below us, and so we can't see it. And so anytime you pollute any part of the ground, it's going to seep into the water. We use the word percolate, which means it's just going to filter through the ground and it's going to get into our water system, and then it could pollute everything. Okay, so how does agriculture activity most likely affect the surface water of the area? Well, excess crop fertilizer is carried off by runoff into the river, causing excess growth of water plants. Okay, that's our answer. Because fertilizer is going to run off, and fertilizer allows for things to grow quicker. Now, this can be a negative thing because when things get out of balance, okay, there needs to be shifts, and it's going to affect our ecosystem. Okay, because the population of those water plants are going to increase, so that means whatever eats those are going to increase. Okay, and you can see how it kind of affects everything as we keep going. Everything else is talking about erosion, okay, or just material accumulating on the river. Okay, we're talking about actual pollution that dissolves into the water. Okay, so it's got to be F. Okay, biodiversity, higher biodiversity equals sustainability. Over here, if we get rid of the coyote, we don't have any other options to replace the coyote. All right, or if we get rid of the elk, we don't have any options to replace the elk. Whereas if we go to our bigger food web, okay, we get rid of one of these things. I can't even read them. Okay, let's get rid of the impala. Okay, there's other options to replace the impala for all the predators that eat it already. And then there's other options for plants as well. And so because there's other options, if something bad were to happen to one of these species, it's going to easily recover. Whereas if you get rid of the gray wolves, all of a sudden on the left side, on the Yellowstone National Park food web, okay, you can have an issue where the populations are going to go up big time. Okay, and then you have a lot of issues. All right.